Thank you all for being with us. Congregation Va-Dor's Touch of Torah this evening, January 31st, as we say goodbye to January and hello to February. We have a very interesting parsha tonight, Beshalach, and coinciding with this Torah parsha is the Shabbat called Shabbat Shira, or the Shabbat of Song, and also Tu B'Shvat. They always coincide together. So with that, I'll let Rabbi Barry Silver take over and give us insight into this exciting parsha.
Hey, thanks a lot, Sharon. It's great to be here with everybody. And this is indeed a very interesting parsha, quite a bit of action. This is one of the reasons why the Bible is a bestseller. It's a very popular book. There's a lot of action in it, a lot of excitement, and there certainly is here. We have Beshalach. And the other day, I was talking to my brother, and he's like, does it really matter being able to read the Bible in Hebrew? Is that better than reading a translation? And it really is very interesting because every word has a story behind it. And when you understand the original words, the story is much deeper and gives you insights. That's what I like to share. For instance, in the opening of the Bible, it says God created heaven and earth, and then Vayehi or, let there be light. The word for light is or. Many people don't realize the word oro in Spanish comes from or, meaning light. Oro is gold, it's bright, it's brilliant. Or in French, it's just or is light. The English word aura, it's a light around a person. It's an image that they emit. That's from the same word or. And there are many words in Hebrew that have made their way into English and French and Spanish. And there's a word that we use for the parasha, Beshalach. And shalach means to send out. Some of you may be familiar with the word because you've heard of a shaliach. A shaliach is someone who is sent from Israel to another country. We know them here in the United States, in order to facilitate Jews returning to Israel, immigrating to Israel, visiting Israel. They're a shaliach. It's from the word shalach, to send out. So Israel sends out these people as emissaries, ambassadors of goodwill. Some of you may have heard the Purim song where it says, Shalach manas, give and take. Eat your hamantash and cake. Shalach means to send out. Manos are gifts. So you send out, you share gifts, and then you eat hamantashen. So this passage is called Beshalach. In the sending out of the Jewish people from Egypt, and it starts there. As we know, the liberation of the Jews didn't consist of Pharaoh simply saying, okay, you can go, and that was the end of the story. No, the Torah is known for having much more excitement than that. And so we see that the Jews flee Egypt, but then Pharaoh has a change of heart. And he says, what have I done? Why did I let these people go? So what if I had 10 plagues? Big deal. Maybe it's just a coincidence. He was a plague denier. He was a climate denier. He was literally in denial. When denial turned color, he didn't realize what was really going on. So he chased after the Jews, and the rest is history. We know what happened. The sea parts, the Jews go through, and the Egyptians and their powerful army are drowned. Moses seems to do really well with water. He is like one of these superheroes today. We have superheroes, some of them are able to command the forces of fire or water, or maybe they can fly. So Moses was good with water. He was delivered from water in a basket. When all the Jews were going to be killed, the Nile River saved him. He got water to come out of a rock in the desert to give the people water when they were thirsty. And he now parts the water, and the Jews go through. Of course, according to the Torah, he doesn't do anything. It's God doing it, and he's just a conduit, and he decides to follow God's ways, and then the waters part. We sometimes wonder as modern Jews, well, what if we don't believe this story really happened? Is it meaningless? Should we just dismiss it as legend and of no benefit to us? Or worse, should we say the Torah is not true, and therefore I want nothing to do with it, nothing to do with Judaism, and nothing to do with my people? I'm out. I don't believe this stuff. Sadly, many Jewish people take that route. They take an easy way out. They say, well, I don't believe this, and therefore all of Judaism is worthless. How sad. The Jewish values, the Jewish mission, the Jewish purpose, the culture, the sacred purpose that we have to make this world better, the beauty of sharing holidays together and mitzvahs together and life cycle events together, the joy of Jewish song and history and tradition. I'm tossing it all out because I don't believe this story. It's an easy way out. It's a way out for people who really don't want to take on the burdens, the obligations, the joys, the privilege of being a people with a special mission. And so we ask ourselves, well, what should we make of this? Those of us who question the validity of the actual account, or those of us who are quite certain that it never happened. Well, it's very interesting to note what biologists made of our DNA. Biologists noticed that if you look at human DNA, there's certain parts of it where all the actions seem to be. Certain parts, a very tiny percentage of our DNA would determine our hair color, our eye color, our intelligence, they would control the heart. And then there's a bunch of DNA. They couldn't figure out what it did. It seemed like the vast majority, like 90% of it, was what they called junk DNA. It was DNA that didn't seem to have any purpose, didn't seem to change anything about us. And they postulated, well, maybe it's a vestige. Maybe at one time, 20 million years ago, it did something. And then when we stopped being a fish or an amphibian, these aspects of the DNA didn't have any purpose, and that was just junk. What they're discovering now is that what they thought was junk DNA actually serves a purpose. A lot of it is scaffolding. It makes up the basic structure and the framework upon which these other things are happening. And if you didn't have it, you wouldn't have the structure. In the same way, we look at some of these stories and we think, is all of this stuff that we don't really believe happened, is this all junk Torah passage? Is this all just stuff to get rid of and discard? Or is there maybe a purpose behind it that we can still discern today, even those of us of a skeptical bent, or those of us who like to use science as a sieve or history to try to understand things? So I would submit that what we used to think, and I'm talking about modern progressive Jews who used to think that a lot of this was just junk Torah readings and we can get rid of it or not be Jewish anymore. I'd like to submit that there's a purpose. So we have in this passage, not only that the Jewish people departed and Moses split the sea, but also that there's a great celebration afterwards. And they sang, Mi chamocha Adonai ba'alim ba'aretz, who is like unto God? And then they celebrate the majesty of God. And then it says that Miriam led the women in dancing. And then it says that she led them in song. And there were about 9 different words for dancing in the Torah. We have about as many words for dancing as the Eskimos have for snow. And also as many words for joy as the Eskimos have for snow. We are a very joyous, jubilant people. So what do we discern from all of this? If it's not just completely junk Torah passages, what can we discern from this? Well, for one thing, we discern that women had a very vital role in the Torah. They led the rejoicing, the singing, the prayers, the dancing. They expressed the profound joy and jubilation of freedom. We too should express joy over freedom. We're free here in the United States, and we should express joy. Many times we don't. We just take it for granted. We don't bother voting. We don't protect our freedom. If it's threatened, we sit back and watch and hope for the best. What the Torah is trying to tell us is freedom is an incredible, valuable gift, and it's not automatic. It doesn't always happen. It seemed in the biblical days like it was a gift from God, but actually it was a gift given to us by forefathers and ancestors, incredible minds who conceived of a constitution and a separation of powers and a separation of church and state, and people who were willing to fight for it, brave soldiers and people who gave their lives or sacrificed their lives or ended up maimed in order that we could be free. It's something that we should not take for granted. And also we shouldn't short shrift women and think that, well, they don't really have any role to play in Judaism, or it's a subservient role. In Judaism, traditional Judaism, like traditional every culture, certain things were deemed to be the purview of women and certain things men. Women rejoiced, they sang, they danced. Today we have a slightly different view. We think that men can dance too. Men can also rejoice, and women can lead congregations, and there's nothing that either one can't do, or that they should have an exclusive right to do it. It is true, though, that if you look genetically, there are certain tendencies that men and women have, but it's great that we live in a society where we're free to do what we want, which isn't true in so much of the world, especially based on gender. So I would say this passage is a very important passage. It shows that both genders are valued, have important roles. We should cherish one another, and we should rejoice in freedom and never, ever take it for granted. Freedom is such an incredible gift. It seems like it must come from a divine source, but really it comes from an incredible source within us and within the Jewish psyche and the soul, which says that we're born in a divine image, and therefore nobody has the right to control someone else or to make them into a serf or make them into an object, that every person should be free. And we should treat our friends and our family like that too, not as an object, but as someone who has rights and someone who we should cherish and love. So that's really what the passage could be about, and you don't need to discard any of it. You can simply interpret it in a way that is meaningful for us today. So those are some of my thoughts on the Torah reading today. I'd be glad to entertain other comments or thoughts about the passage, or any questions you have. Of course, the song that is sung, the Mi Chamocha, as the Jews are liberated and the Egyptians are drowned in the sea, we sing that often on a Friday night. Mi Chamocha has become part of our standard liturgy. Anybody have any thoughts they'd like to share or questions? Yeah, I see Maybury. Go ahead. You'll have to unmute.
There it is.
You got it.
Can you hear?
Yeah, we hear you.
All right. It's very interesting, Rabbi, that you started this with the premise that Moses was led a lot by water, parting the Red Seas. Now, I was a school teacher for 40 years. I believe in science. Okay. And from what I'm getting now, all over the world, doesn't matter where you're at, the United States, over in Korea, over in Russia, or wherever, we are running out of water. So what are we going to do?
Well, you're certainly right about that. We're running out of water. We're destroying our water supplies. We're dumping tons of toxins into the oceans every day. spoiling our rivers and lakes and streams. I consider it to be sacrilegious. I consider it blasphemous. If you believe in a creator and you believe that this creation is divine, we're destroying it and committing sacrilege. Perhaps that's another meaning that we can understand from this, that Moses understood the value of water, and we should too, and we should do everything we can to protect it. We got a long way to go. We're doing some really horrible things to our water supply in the ocean. So I appreciate you raising that point.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I have a point. I would watch a lot of these programs where they try to find out what in the Bible might be true.
Yeah.
And I believe that archaeologists seem to feel that something did happen with the Red Sea parting in some way, maybe not exactly the way it's written in the Bible, but there was some sort of event.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at this phenomenon in general. Okay. You have people saying that Noah's Ark really existed. You have people trying to verify whether parts of Greek mythology or Roman mythology really existed. And let's put it this way. If you're creating a TV show, it's a lot more interesting and entertaining to say, yeah, maybe this really happened. I found some evidence to support the crossing of the Red Sea or the existence of Noah's Ark. It's a lot more entertaining, and people are going to watch your program more than to say, oh, this never happened. There's no evidence.
Gotcha.
Right.
Well,
so people want to believe this stuff really happened. Now, but if you take a scientific approach to it, then you're not going to accept things because you want to believe it. You're going to follow the evidence wherever it leads.
No,
the evidence for the parting of the Red Sea is zero.
Is zero?
It's zero.
Okay.
Zero.
Right.
Now there are people who have really devoted their lives to it. For instance, when the Jews retook Jerusalem and the Promised Land and were back in Israel, you know what the first thing they did was? They sent out archaeologists to dig up all the sites where they thought they might be able to find evidence of certain things so they could prove it up. They really were fascinated and were really devoted to trying to prove up the Bible and see what was true. And something amazing happened. They went throughout the entire Sinai where the Jews supposedly crossed and the surrounding areas, and they found nothing, no artifacts, no nothing. Now you can say, well, it was a kind of a dry environment, maybe it didn't leave, but archaeologists tell us if there was really a time where 600,000 people walked through that area, there would absolutely, positively be artifacts that you would find. You would find bones, you would find animals, you would find clothing. I'm sure when they left, they didn't pick up everything meticulously and clean up and then take it to the next place. They're leaving stuff behind, and the archaeologists were stunned at the fact that there was no evidence to back up the as far as the sea. You read stuff. Well, you know what? The Sea of Reeds, sometimes it has like tides and it comes in and it goes out. Oh yeah, and maybe there was a big wind and it came. Just think about it logically for a minute. The ocean has bigger tides than a sea, like the Reed Sea. Do you think it's possible that a big wind came and blew the ocean apart so that somebody would cross through, and then all of a sudden at a certain time it would all collapse on the entire army, and the entire army would just happen to be right in the way, and none of them were on the periphery or on the outside. None of them could escape. It just happened and they're all done. It defies any type of logic or reason. It certainly defies science.
No, I thought that maybe there was some sort of high tide or something. I did not expect that people were destroyed or anything like that. I thought that maybe there was a high tide or something. It could have been, but I never expected really that
there was a high tide. There's a high tide for seas and there's a high tide in oceans, but the high tide doesn't separate and deliver people from Pharaoh. But here's what we do know. We do know that the Jewish people they migrated. They were nomads. That we know. And so it's very likely that the Jews went into Egypt. And it's very likely that at another time they came out of Egypt, not 600,000 and not all at once and not by divine deliverance.
Right, yeah.
But we know that. The word, it's interesting, the word for Hebrew, abiru, is related to the word over or avar, meaning to cross over. So the word Hebrew is etymologically related to those who crossed over. So they think that it goes back to the time when Jews passed over and were nomads who were crossing over into one land or another, and that's where the word Hebrew comes from. It's also something very interesting is that the Egyptian empire went through periods where the kingdom was weak and they were the dominant empire, for thousands of years. But there were times when they were weak, and when that happened, a group of people called the Hyksos invaded and took over control of Egypt, and they actually set up a capital in a different place. Well, the Hyksos were strong, but not that strong. So what they did was they allied themselves with others who also wanted to join with them in plundering Egypt and taking it over. Could you imagine the benefits of being able to take over Egypt and all the spoils that you would get? So the Hyksos, this is historically true, were a group of people that came into Egypt and took over, but they couldn't do it themselves. They aligned. And who did they align with? Semitic tribes. So now it's starting to get interesting because the Jews are a Semitic tribe. So maybe the Jews aligned with them, and maybe if they were enslaved, they had reason to have a slave revolt and uprising, align themselves with the Hyksos. The Hyksos would conspire with them and others and take over Egypt, which is what historians know happened. The Hyksos did that. They're not quite sure who they aligned with, but Semitic groups. And then when that happened, it's interesting also to note that Moshe is a Hebrew name. It's also an Egyptian name, and he's the son of. And Ra is God, the sun god. So Ramses is like the sun god or the son of Moses. Ra, Moses, Ramses, which is also interesting. It's also known that around 1300 or 1250 BCE, which if you do all the begats is around when the time Moses lived, Egypt had a pharaoh named Akhenaten. And Akhenaten was the first monotheist. So all of a sudden now at the time of the Hyksos invasion and Moses, around the time that he lived, all of a sudden Egypt becomes monotheistic. And then there's a story about Joseph, who achieved great power in Egypt, which could have coincided with Moses and Joshua, or Joseph taking over power and starting a monotheistic religion. Now, here's one more thing I'm going to share with you that I find fascinating. And everything I'm telling you is not made up stuff that you'd see on some wacko TV. These are all facts, okay? These are facts. In Egypt, the name of the pharaoh who was the monotheist was Akhenaten.
But isn't he also pronounced Akhenaten or some? I'm not quite sure.
Yes, he's also
It's
pronounced
related
that
to
way
King
by people who are not familiar with how to actually pronounce.
Yeah, I don't know how to
Egyptian,
pronounce it.
right? But let me just share with you Akhenaten.
Yes,
is
he's one
very,
God.
very similar to when in Judaism, the God is referred to as, he calls himself Anochi Adonai. Anochi is the word for I. And now in normal Hebrew, it's Ani. Well, if you want to say I, you say Ani. But the majestic I, like a king or the God uses, is Anochi. And Anochi is incredibly close to Anch, which is the Egyptian symbol, which actually looks like a cross. It's a religious symbol. It's A-N, it's spelled A-N-K-H, but it's just like Anochi. The Anochi just has a tiny yud at the end. And Anochi, and then Aton, A-T-O-N, is incredibly close to Adon, which is true. Adonai. The I at the end means my God, Adonai. So in Akhenaten is I am Adonai, and the Pharaoh believed that he was God or the son of God or whatever. So he would have called himself that. So we do see clear evidence, irrefutable evidence of the relationship between Judaism an Egyptian religion. And the question is, was Judaism influenced strictly by Egyptian religion and came out of that, or were the Egyptians influenced by an influx of Semitic peoples and Semitic ideas, which then brought monotheism to Egypt? I believe, based on my study of it, that the latter is the case, that Egypt was influenced by Judaic monotheism, and even though all of the words bear that out, and so we can take credit for that. But it is very interesting to see the connection, and these are real things that we do know about. And as we study more and get more artifacts, we learn more and more about what really happened back then.
Yeah, there's a lot
else?
of information about that. I've been reading about it, and National Geographic has a lot of information about him being, the first monotheist, really.
Right. It's quite fascinating. Anybody else have any thoughts they want to share?
I do. I've been always curious, and I'm kind of confused. How did all these writings come to be? Where were they found? Were they found in tombs? Were they found on paper? I mean, where did all this information come from?
Well, the truth is that we do not have any Torah scrolls that go back, obviously, to the time of Moses or anywhere close to it. The incredible find was the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are probably the oldest version of a Torah that we have, which is really a couple of thousand years old, and they belong to the Essenes. And they were found, if you ask, well, how did they find them? There was this Arab child who had a donkey that escaped and went up into like the hills, and it was hard for him to climb up there, so he wanted to scare the donkey, so he took some rocks and he threw the rocks at the donkey to try to startle him so he'd come down. And one of the throws, he heard ding, and it didn't sound like a rock. It sounded like he hit like a jar or something. So he was like, what was that? Then he went up there and he found a jar, ceramic jar. And then he looked inside and he saw, wow, there's scrolls in here. And that was the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And to see what happened with that, and then his parents sold it to some guy for like $100, and then he sold it to somebody for $300, and then somebody then in the chain found out, oh my gosh, this is like one of the greatest discoveries in biblical history, and then they got a proper amount for it. But that's one way. But the scrolls that we have are very interesting. We have a scroll like a Genesis and an Exodus, but have them all together in the Torah. Most people, if they are raised like conservative or Orthodox, they're kind of led to believe, oh yeah, the Torah, it's always existed as the Torah for 3,000 years. That's not true. The Torah wasn't gathered together and amassed until around a couple of thousand years ago, which means that it's not even remotely close to contemporaneous at all. So there were scrolls of Genesis and Exodus. The scroll of Deuteronomy supposedly was found around the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, after the Babylonian captivity. When they came back, all of a sudden somebody said, oh my gosh, look at this, I just discovered a scroll, it's called Deuteronomy. Oh, and by the way, it happens to agree exactly with the reigning king at this time about his views that reflected exactly in the book of Deuteronomy, which leads people to believe that that king had a scribe write down his views and then claim that he found this in the temple when they came back. So, but all of these things weren't amassed and put together until a process which we call canonization, which is when the Jewish community as a whole recognized and said, okay, we accept this as authoritative and God's Torah, which happened somewhere around like a couple of thousand years ago, a little more than that, a little more than a couple of thousand years ago. And we don't even know exactly when, and we don't, like you say, we don't even know the process of it. Originally, these things were passed down through singing. They sang it, and then eventually they started writing it down. But a lot of books, or some books, were cast aside. So there was never a time when God said, okay, here's the Torah. It was really a human process of collectively agreeing, these books we think are God's, these books aren't. Others are holy, but they're not God's word. They're so-called the Apocrypha. There's certain books that are considered sacred, but not quite, didn't make it into the top 5 and into the writings. So it's a very messy process that nobody really knows. The truth is, nobody really knows exactly like who wrote this stuff. The scholars can tell you that certain parts of the Torah reflect a view that the king is supreme, and it makes the king look good, and God appointed the king. There's other parts of the Torah where the king looks like a buffoon and a goofball, and God's saying, don't pick kings. You don't want a king. They're going to screw things up, and they're going to oppress you. Scholars believe that those parts were not written by the kings. Those were written by prophets, or those were written by other sages, or those were written by people who thought the monarchy was corrupt. And then you have other parts that say, no. The prophets, those are the guys who speak for God. It's the prophets who have so there's certain parts that were written by people who thought the kings were supreme, or the prophets were supreme, or the priests. Certain parts of the Torah make the priests seem supreme, and Aaron is viewed as the high priest, and the priesthood is the ones who do the sacrifices, and they have the connection to God. So you have 3 competing groups, all claiming that they are the ones who are the best representatives and have the pipeline to God. The kings, the priests, and the prophets. And in the Torah, you see competing verses making one look good and one look bad. So scholars have taken the time to review the whole Torah and to view the language of the Torah, like what word did they use to describe God? What word did they use to describe this concept? And they notice consistencies in it. And they're able to say, this is the J writer. That's the Yahweh writer. He uses Yahweh. He was the one who thought he was part of the king, the monarchy class. And then this is a different writer, the P. He was the D writer. They've analyzed the Torah to figure out the different strains, and nobody knows for sure. And it's an interesting intellectual exercise. But again, to answer your question, it was comprised over 1,500 years, we believe. And it contains a lot of different philosophies, a lot of different thinking, and a lot of different time periods. Even the Hebrew, over 15 years, evolved, and they can tell from the Hebrew words sometimes approximately when it was written. Just like if you read English and you read something from 500 years ago and you were smart, you would know, oh, this was written around this time period. So they are able to discern when these things were written, and sometimes where, Northern Kingdom or Southern Kingdom. That made a big difference also.
Oh my gosh.
It's complicated.
Wow. It is complicated.
It wasn't just God said, boom, I'm giving the Torah to Moses. Like we sing like even in a Reformed synagogue, and God gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai. Well, it wasn't quite like that. It's a little more complicated.
I don't believe that.
Anybody else? By the way, what I'm saying is not heresy. What I'm saying is not like, well, that's just Silver saying some crazy stuff that no Jews believe in. What I'm saying is the party line of the Reformed Jewish movement, the Reconstructionist Jewish movement, the Humanist Jewish movement really has no use for any of this stuff. But what I'm suggesting is what we know about the Torah based on scholars and history. And this is what these movements believe. What I've noticed is the rabbis know that, but they don't say it very often because they don't want to disillusion people and have people think, oh, this rabbi doesn't believe in God or the Torah, and he's saying that the Torah was just written by people, so why bother? Who cares? There are rabbis out there besides me who are saying these things and are teaching these things, but pulpit rabbis tend not to do it because it's a lot more fun and a lot more interesting to tell people this was given by God on Mount Sinai to Moses, rather than a bunch of people just kind of assembled this. Anybody else?
Wow.
Oh, yes, Rabbi. Getting back to the gentleman that made the point about the water shortage or the water problem. If you look at modern day Israel, I mean, that is what they've done with the engineering and metering, terrace farming. I mean, it's just, there is really no issue there. Okay, I mean, it's an engineering,
Wow.
okay, embracing science, and put it to work. I mean, we make excuses here, what should actually be done. I mean, it's.
I agree with you. What Israel's doing is nothing less than miraculous as far as the incredible use of water to get as much use as you can of every drop. By the way, which technology they share with the third world, and they share with Africa and with other countries, and they're doing amazing things, which is why Israel is a blessing not only to Jewish people, it's a blessing to the world, and Israel may very well solve some of the most difficult, entrenched environmental problems that we have with their brains. However, with all the technology they have, Israel still has severe problems with water. The Dead Sea is dying, if you'll pardon the expression. There's really bitter conflicts over water between Israel and Jordan, and there's simply not enough water for everybody, despite the best technology, partly also because of overpopulation. If you're Orthodox and having 8, 9, 10 kids, where's the water going to come from for all of that? I mean, you can have technology to get every ounce you can out of every drop of water, but if you all of a sudden have twice or 3 times as many people, then that technology is not going to be able to catch up. But yes, Israel's doing incredible things with water and in other ways, and I believe that United States and Israel should work together and take some of the smartest people who, in my opinion, happen to be Jewish very often, put them in a room and say, okay, go solve these problems, the energy crisis, the water shortage, climate change, and like they did with the Manhattan Project. They took a bunch of people, mostly Jewish people, put them in a place in Los Alamos and said, figure out the atomic bomb, figure out radar, figure out the computer with ENIAC, and they did it. That's what we need to do now. Yeah. Anybody else? Stanley, did you want to share something? Do you have your hand up?
Well, Albert talked about Israel. I was going to mention, it was my understanding that they've figured out how to take the salt water and desalinate it into useful water. And of course, worldwide, global wide, there's ocean water everywhere. So if somebody could figure out how to process the desalination in a cost-effective way, I mean, there's plenty of water. We just have to figure out how to get the salt out.
Well, Stanley is our president and our leader. You can see why he's quite informed. And yes, Israel does have desalination plants. And what you said, Stanley, is quite accurate in that if we could figure out how to do it in a cost-efficient way, it's very, very expensive. I mean, theoretically, if you could desalinate water on a big scale for a small amount of money, you could solve the climate change issue of oceans rising. I mean, there's a lot of other problems with climate change, but the rising of the oceans, you could just take that extra water, desalinate it, and use it, and it would be great. But we don't have the technology today to do that in a cost-effective way. However, maybe with Israel's technology tomorrow, they might come up with a way. But we shouldn't rely on technology and think, well, that's the magic bullet. We can do whatever we want now because technology is going to solve the problem. It's not true. And even if we solve the problems of ocean rising, there's a lot more issues with drought and everything else dealing about climate change than just simply the rise in the water. But yeah, Israel is doing great, making great strides in desalination. So in conjunction with the NOW meeting, where they're giving me an honor as far as Feminist of the Year, but I consider that to be a statement that they're making, saying that men can be feminists and men should be involved in this effort. And Congregation Va-Dor will also be honored as a congregation that chose to file a lawsuit to protect women's rights, which of course is very important to NOW. This is a very good opportunity for us to network and to work with a group that's leading the charge for abortion rights, which actually happens to dovetail in with Jewish rights as well. I'm hoping that our congregation will support this luncheon in a big way. We're really doing great things over at Grand Villa. And if you haven't had a chance to go over there, it's a beautiful facility. The people are really nice. The organizers there are very gracious to us. We have a place to meet, and we don't even have to pay for it. And the accommodations are beautiful, but I think we should have more people showing up because we have some really great music, some inspiration. The service isn't too long, except if the rabbi gets long-winded, which sometimes happens when we have special events. But, you know, it's about an hour and a quarter or so. And I really encourage everybody to go and bring your friends, bring your family. Let's get a big crowd there. And let's show that rational Judaism can prevail in this area, because the world needs rational religion. One thing we've seen in recent times is that science and reason and logic is like leaving the political world, the religious world. People are science deniers, and we need to return to a type of religion and government and politics that respects knowledge and education and rational thought and science. And our congregation is helping to lead the charge. We're not alone, but we're doing that, and it would be great if we had a lot of support. And so that's why I thank everybody for being part of this discussion, for supporting Congregation Va-Dor. Let's get a big crowd out there. Let's get a lot of support out there, and let's spread the word about rational religion, which I believe rational religion offers the greatest potential to cure all the problems, and I'm saying all of them, that the world faces. And irrational religion poses the greatest threat to the world as we know it. Irrational religion is the greatest threat, and rational religion, I believe, is potentially the greatest cure. And if you just give me just another 30 seconds, I'll just say this. The issue of police reform, right? We can all agree that we need police reform. However, what's more important than Congress passing a law is a transformation of mindset. And that's what we need among the police, among human beings, among our species. It's a different way of thinking, because just having laws isn't going to work. It has to be a different mindset among the police. We're here to serve, we're here to protect, we're here to be a source of compassion for people, and we're not going to use brute force until we have to. Yes, if we have to take a life and defend ourselves, we will do that. But we're going to make sure that we put people on the force who have a different way of thinking, who don't think shoot first or beat up first and then ask questions. We need a transformation of thinking. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here at Va-Dor also, to not just have a law that's different, or even a law about guns that's a little different, but a transformation of thinking. We don't need all this violence. Let's transform how we think to be more peaceful. And that's what Judaism is really all about. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Good night.